You stand in the Hall of Mirrors at Fontainebleau, where golden light fractures across crystal surfaces, creating 1,000 reflections of a world built on beautiful lies. The year is 1559, and beneath the shimmer of French opulence, something darker breathes, the ancient machinery of power that devours young souls like communion wine. Listen, do you hear it? That soft rustling isn't the wind through silk tapestries. It's the sound of dreams being traded like currency, of innocence packaged and shipped across borders to seal treaties written in blood. In this palace where every surface gleams with gold leaf, where Italian masters have painted cherubs with knowing smiles, a 14-year-old girl named Isabel de Valois moves through corridors that will soon become her memory of home. She doesn't know yet that she's already dead. Watch her glide past the Galerie François Premier, her silk slippers silent against marble floors that have witnessed 5 centuries of political communion. Her gown, deep blue velvet embroidered with silver fleur-de-lis, catches the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. She pauses before a Venetian mirror, adjusting the pearl necklace at her throat, unaware that she's practicing to be a portrait, a diplomatic gift wrapped in noble bloodlines and royal education. This is how empires feed themselves, not with armies alone, but with the soft flesh of daughters. The French court of 1559 operates like a vast theatrical production where everyone knows their role except the sacrificial offerings. Ambassadors smile while calculating the dowry value of princesses. Mothers kiss their daughters goodnight while secretly negotiating their marriages to strangers in foreign courts. Kings play chess with human pieces, and checkmate always means a wedding. You must understand the mathematics of royal marriage in the 16th century. It's an equation, written in Latin and solved with tears. 1 princess equals territorial claims. 2 kingdoms joined equals 3 decades of tentative peace. A teenage girl's womb equals the future of dynasties that span continents. Love? Love is a luxury reserved for peasants who have nothing more valuable to trade than their hearts. Isabel moves through this golden labyrinth, believing in fairy tales because no one has told her the truth, that she is not a princess in a story, but inventory in a warehouse. Her tutors have taught her Spanish, unknowingly preparing her tongue for a language that will become her prison. Her dancing masters have trained her feet for foreign floors. Her confessor has strengthened her soul for battles he cannot name. The walls of Fontainebleau hold secrets like a stone diary. In the Oval Court, where Italian architects dreamed of perfect symmetry, French kings have made promises they never intended to keep. Behind these Renaissance facades, in chambers where candlelight flickers against portraits of dead monarchs, letters arrive from Spain. They speak of Philip II, a king who collects wives like religious artifacts and discards them with the same devotional efficiency. Catherine de' Medici, Isabel's mother, reads these letters in her private study. She runs her fingers over the wax seals bearing the Spanish coat of arms, those lions and castles that will soon decorate her daughter's tomb. Catherine, who survived her own diplomatic marriage through cunning and cruelty, knows exactly what she's about to do to her child. But this is how queens are made, not through coronations, but through sacrifices so complete they erase the person who came before. The irony cuts like a blade forged in Italian steel. Isabel de Valois, princess of the most sophisticated court in Europe, is being prepared for a life of such profound isolation that even her name will change. She will become Isabel de la Paz, Isabella of Peace, as if renaming her will transform personal destruction into political virtue. You see, the true horror isn't in the dungeons beneath Fontainebleau. It's in the drawing rooms where mothers measure their daughters for diplomatic coffins. It's in the libraries where young girls read poetry about courtly love while contracts are signed for their sexual servitude. It's in the chapels where they pray for happiness, while priests already know their prayers will be answered with suffering. As Isabel walks through her father's palace this autumn evening, the candles in their golden sconces cast shadows that seem to reach for her like prophetic hands. She doesn't notice how the courtiers' conversations pause when she passes, then resume in whispers thick with pity and political calculation. She doesn't see how her mother's ladies-in-waiting avoid meeting her eyes, already mourning a girl who still breathes. The Renaissance masters who decorated these walls understood something about beauty and terror existing in the same frame. Look at their frescoes. Angels and demons dance together. Divine love and earthly power intertwine like serpents. They painted the truth about courts like this one, places where artistic magnificence serves as wallpaper for institutional cruelty. Tonight, as Isabel sleeps in her canopied bed beneath embroidered scenes of mythological heroines, diplomatic pouches cross the Pyrenees. Inside them, documents that will transform a French princess into Spanish property, signed with ink mixed from oak gall and iron, the same components used to write death sentences. But here, in this golden moment before the machinery of empire claims her, Isabel de Valois remains gloriously, tragically herself. A girl who believes in love because no one has yet taught her that kingdoms are built on its systematic murder. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tonight, she dreams in French, her last dreams as a free soul in a cage made of gold, and promises that mere like lies in candlelight. What price would you pay to warn her? And would she listen, or would she choose the beautiful destruction that awaits? You must see her as she was before the world taught her that love was currency and hearts were legal tender. Picture Isabel de Valois at age 7, racing through the gardens of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, her copper hair streaming behind her like a banner of rebellion against the rigid protocols that governed every breath in the French court. She believed then that princesses married for love because the troubadours said so, and troubadours surely never lied. How could she know that every song was a beautiful deception? The daughter of Henri II and Catherine de' Medici grew up in a world of contradictions that would shape her gentle soul into something both resilient and tragically vulnerable. Her father, that warrior king who threw himself into tournaments like a man courting death, showered his children with an affection that courtiers found almost scandalous in its genuine warmth. Her mother, the Florentine serpent, who would one day orchestrate the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, held Isabel close with hands that could caress and poison with equal skill. Watch her in the royal nursery, where Italian masters painted frescoes of pastoral scenes, shepherds and shepherdesses playing at love in meadows that existed nowhere on earth. Isabel traced these painted figures with small fingers, believing that somewhere beyond the palace walls such innocence actually lived. Her governess, Madame de Valois, would find her there at dawn, whispering stories to the painted lovers, creating elaborate tales where everyone lived happily in the end. "Tell me about real love, Madame," Isabel would plead, her dark eyes wide with curiosity that hadn't yet learned to fear its own questions. And Madame de Valois, who had survived 3 royal households and understood the machinery of court destruction, would smile and speak of courtly romance while her heart broke for the child who believed her. The education of a French princess in the 1550s was a masterpiece of ironic preparation. Isabel's tutors taught her Spanish until she spoke it like a native, never mentioning that fluency would become her chains. They instructed her in the art of diplomatic conversation, how to say nothing while appearing to say everything, how to smile while calculating the political cost of sincerity. Master Clement taught her to play the lute with fingers that danced across strings like prayers, unaware that music would become her only honest language in a foreign court where even tears required translation. You can see her in the castle library at Fontainebleau, sunlight streaming through leaded windows as she devours the romances of Chrétien de Troyes. She reads of Lancelot and Guinevere, of Tristan and Isolde, absorbing these stories into her bloodstream like a drug that would make reality unbearable. In her mind, marriage was about stolen glances across crowded halls, about secret letters pressed between prayer book pages, about love that conquered kingdoms and transformed ordinary mortals into legends. The cruelest irony? She was absolutely right about love's transformative power. She simply didn't understand that transformation could mean destruction. Isabel's relationship with her siblings created the emotional template that would both save and doom her. With young Charles, who would become Charles IX, she played elaborate games of make-believe where they ruled kingdoms of kindness. Her sister Claude, married off to the Duke of Lorraine at 14, wrote letters home that Isabel read with growing unease, descriptions of conjugal duties that sounded more like military campaigns than romantic adventures. "Marriage is different for princesses," Claude wrote in cipher, her words carefully coded to evade Catherine's spies. "The heart learns to hide, dear sister. It learns to find love in moments between the moments, in glances that mean nothing to observers but everything to you." Isabel, still innocent of what such words truly meant, interpreted them as poetry rather than survival instructions. The French court's obsession with courtly love created a devastating cognitive dissonance for royal daughters. They watched their parents' political marriage function with mechanical efficiency, Henri pursuing his mistress Diane de Poitiers with public devotion while Catherine endured with Medici patience, and somehow convinced themselves that their own futures would be different. The troubadours sang of love triumphant. Surely that meant something. In her private chambers, Isabel practiced the arts that would make her a proper wife. She learned to embroider with stitches so fine they seemed drawn by angel hair, creating tapestries that told stories of domestic bliss between mythological figures. Her needlework depicted scenes that would never exist in her own life. Couples walking hand in hand through gardens, lovers sharing books beside fountains, mothers and fathers playing with children who called them by name rather than title. The psychological preparation was perhaps the most sophisticated torture ever devised. Isabel's confessor, Father Benoit, taught her that love was God's greatest gift to humanity, while simultaneously instructing her in the divine necessity of obedience to earthly authority. Love was sacred, but duty was sacrament. The human heart mattered to Christ, but political necessity mattered to kings. These contradictions created a fault line through her soul that would eventually split her in two. You must understand the particular innocence that shaped Isabel's worldview. Unlike her mother, who arrived in France already broken by Florentine politics, or her sister Claude, who possessed Catherine's instinct for emotional self-preservation, Isabel developed her conception of love in the brief golden period between childhood and political awakening. She believed in goodness because she had experienced it. She trusted in mercy because her father showed it. She expected tenderness because her brothers gave it freely. This wasn't naivety, it was faith. And faith, in the machinery of 16th-century politics, was a form of voluntary martyrdom. As Isabel approached her 14th birthday in the autumn of 1559, she began to sense shadows gathering at the edges of her golden world. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Her mother's ladies-in-waiting looked at her with expressions that mixed pity and calculation. Letters arrived bearing foreign seals that made Catherine's face assume the expression of a woman solving complex mathematical equations involving human suffering. But even then, Isabel clung to her troubadour dreams. Somewhere in Europe, she believed, a prince waited who would love her for herself rather than her dowry, who would see past her political value to the girl who whispered stories to painted shepherdesses and dreamed of walking hand in hand through real gardens with someone who knew her name. The nightingales still sang in the gardens of Saint-Germain-en-Laye. They sang of love and loss, of hearts that soared and fell, of dreams that took flight only to crash against the cold stone of reality. Isabel listened and believed their songs were promises rather than warnings. You witness the moment innocence dies, not with a whimper, but with the splintering crack of an ash-wood lance against a king's visor. June 30th, 1559, the date carved into Isabel de Valois' soul like an epitaph for everything she believed about the world. Her father, Henri II, lies bleeding in the tournament grounds of the Hôtel des Tournelles, his eye socket pierced by wood fragments that carry with them the death of a daughter's faith in divine protection. But you must understand, this isn't just a king dying. This is the moment when a 14-year-old Samid, our old girl, learns that God plays politics, and politics plays with human hearts like dice carved from bone. Watch Isabel in the royal pavilion as her father's blood seeps into the sawdust of the tournament ring. She wears cloth of gold, dressed for celebration, her hands still sticky with candied violets she'd been eating while applauding her father's prowess. The golden threads of her gown catch the afternoon sun, creating an ironic halo around a girl who is about to discover that angels are far less reliable than ambassadors. The crowd's cheers transform into a sound you've never heard before, the collective intake of breath from 1,000 throats, realizing they're witnessing the precise moment when a kingdom's future pivots on a splinter of wood. But Isabel doesn't hear the crowd. She hears only her own heartbeat, suddenly loud as cathedral bells, counting down the seconds until everything she knows becomes everything she's lost. "Papa?" Her voice cuts through the chaos like a child calling for comfort in a nightmare, not yet understanding that nightmares don't end when kings open their eyes. Gabriel Montgomery, the Scottish captain whose lance found its fatal mark, kneels in the dirt beside the fallen king, his face a mask of horror that mirrors Isabel's own. He doesn't know, how could he, that his accidental thrust has just driven a 14-year-old girl into a marriage that will consume her like fire-eating silk. The tournament was meant to celebrate peace between France and Spain, sealed by Isabel's betrothal to Philip II. Now it becomes the funeral pyre, where her childhood burns. Catherine de' Medici moves through the carnage with the efficiency of someone who has always expected disaster to arrive in beautiful disguise. She doesn't run to her husband. Queens don't run, but you can see in her measured steps the calculation already beginning. Henri dying means you, François ascending the throne. François on the throne means the Guises gaining power. The Guises gaining power means alliances must be secured immediately, and alliances in the 16th century are written in marriage contracts signed with virgin blood. The Spanish match must proceed, Catherine murmurs to her advisers as surgeons work frantically over Henri's still form. The words float across the pavilion like poison in perfume, reaching Isabel's ears with crystalline clarity. In this moment of maximum grief, while her father fights for life, his widow is already trading his daughter's future for political stability. This is your first lesson in royal mathematics. Trauma plus opportunity equals transaction. Isabel's world fractures along fault lines she didn't know existed. For 14 years, she believed her father's love was a shield against the cruelties she glimpsed at court's edges. She watched other princesses disappear into foreign marriages, like ships sailing beyond the horizon, but somehow convinced herself that Henri's devotion would protect her from such a fate. Now, as physicians probe his wounds with instruments that glint like torture devices, she understands with brutal clarity that love, even a king's love, is powerless against the machinery of state necessity. The death watch begins. For 10 days, Henri lingers between life and politics while Europe holds its breath. Isabel sits beside his bed in the Château de Tournelle, watching her father's face swell beyond recognition, listening to his labored breathing that sounds like distant thunder warning of approaching storms. His good eye, when it opens, seeks her face with desperate intensity, as if he's trying to memorize features he'll never see again. "My little nightingale," he whispers on the 7th day, his voice fractured like his skull. "Sing for me." But Isabel's voice has died with her innocence. She opens her mouth and produces only silence, thick as church incense, heavy as diplomatic seals being pressed into warm wax. During these 10 days of vigil, letters arrive from Spain with the persistence of carrion birds. Philip II, informed of Henri's injury, expresses appropriate concern for his future father-in-law's health while simultaneously inquiring about the status of dowry negotiations. His ambassadors speak in conditional clauses and subjunctive moods, their language dancing around the central question: will the French princess still be available for collection when the king finishes dying? You must see the exquisite cruelty of timing. Isabel's betrothal to Philip was announced during the tournament celebrations, a political masterstroke designed to seal the peace of Cateau Cambrésis with ceremonial grandeur. The same joust that was meant to herald her engagement becomes the funeral march for her father and the death knell of her freedom. Irony, in royal courts, arrives with the punctuality of executioners. On the 10th day, Henri II dies. The moment his breathing stops, before his body has cooled, before the last rites have been administered, Catherine begins implementing the political calculations she's been refining for over a week. Isabel, still kneeling beside her father's deathbed, hears the Queen Mother's voice cutting through the priest's prayers like a blade through silk. Send word to His Catholic Majesty that the marriage alliance remains unchanged. The princess will depart for Spain within the year. The princess, not my daughter, not Isabel. The princess, a political commodity whose value has just increased because kingdoms in crisis need stability, and stability comes through marriages that transform grief into governmental policy. Watch Isabel's face in this moment. Do you see it? The precise instant when she understands that she has no name anymore, only a function. She is not a daughter mourning her father, but a diplomatic asset being transferred between kingdoms like a piece of particularly valuable furniture. Her tears for Henri become indistinguishable from tears for herself, salt water seasoning her transformation from girl to symbol. The court changes around her with supernatural speed. Yesterday's playmates bow when she approaches. Servants who once smiled now avert their eyes. Even her siblings treat her differently, as if she's already dead to them, a ghost wearing familiar features. She has become what every royal daughter eventually becomes, a stranger in her own life, practicing to be a portrait of herself. Catherine, grief-stricken but grimly practical, begins Isabel's accelerated preparation for exile disguised as marriage. Spanish tutors arrive to polish her pronunciation. Dressmakers measure her for a trousseau that feels more like burial clothes. Protocol masters drill her in Spanish court etiquette that transforms every natural gesture into calculated performance. You must understand, ma fille, Catherine explains with Medici directness. Your father's death has made your marriage not just politically advantageous, but absolutely necessary. France needs Spain's friendship now more than ever. Isabel nods obediently because she has learned, in 10 days of watching her father die, that royal daughters have only two choices: compliance or destruction. She chooses compliance, not understanding yet that for girls like her, the two are synonymous. The funeral procession winds through Paris like a serpent made of black silk and broken dreams. Isabel walks behind her father's coffin wearing mourning clothes that feel prophetic, already dressed for her own funeral, though she doesn't know it yet. The crowds line the streets to watch their dead king pass, but their eyes linger on the young princess, whose tears catch sunlight, like diamonds pricing themselves for foreign markets. As Henri's body disappears into the royal tomb at Saint-Denis, Isabel feels something in her chest grow cold and still. Not her heart, that continues beating with mechanical reliability, but whatever part of her had believed. In protection, in love that conquers politics, in fathers who could shield their daughters from the world's appetite for beautiful destruction. She is 14 years old, newly orphaned, and contractually promised to a man who collects wives like religious relics. But the most devastating truth hasn't fully dawned on her yet. Her father's death was not the tragedy. Her father's death was the beginning. The real tragedy starts when she says "I do" in a language that will become her prison, to a man who will never know her name. You stand at the French border in January 1560, watching a 14-year-old girl cross from everything she's ever known into a country that will devour her with the systematic efficiency of a religious ceremony. Isabel de Valois, soon to become Isabel de la Paz, sits in a gilded carriage that moves like a funeral procession toward the Pyrenees, each turn of its wheels carrying her deeper into a labyrinth designed by men who understand that the most effective prisons are built from marriage contracts and royal obligation. The morning mist clings to the mountains like grief refusing to lift, and you can almost taste the metallic fear in the air as Isabel's French retinue prepares for the ceremonial handover. This isn't just a wedding journey. This is a human sacrifice disguised as diplomacy, complete with religious blessings and international witnesses to legitimize the offering. But first, you must witness the grotesque theater of royal marriage by proxy. In the Cathedral of Notre-Dame de Paris, just weeks after her father's funeral, Isabel stood before an altar where the Duke of Alba represented Philip II of Spain. She spoke her marriage vows to a man who wasn't there, pledging her body and soul to a stranger, while Spanish ambassadors smiled like merchants completing a particularly profitable transaction. I, Isabel de Valois, take thee, Philip. Yet her voice echoed in the cathedral like a ghost speaking its own eulogy. The Duke of Alba, gray-bearded and cold as winter iron, accepted her vows with the song. enthusiasm of a man signing property deeds. Behind them, courtiers whispered calculations about dowry payments and territorial concessions, while a child legally wed herself to her own destruction. Now, as her carriage winds through mountain passes where wolves hunt and winds howl like banshees, Isabel confronts the physical reality of her political marriage. Each mile takes her farther from the French court's familiar cruelties and deeper into Spanish mysteries that promise horrors she cannot yet imagine. Her ladies-in-waiting, those few brave enough to accompany her into exile, maintain cheerful conversation that sounds increasingly desperate as the landscape grows more alien around them. His Majesty is known for his piety, offers Madame de Clermont, Isabel's chief lady, as if religious devotion automatically translated into marital kindness, and his dedication to the faith ensures a structured household. Isabel nods mutely, staring through frost-glazed windows at a countryside that looks carved from granite and religious fervor. She has heard the stories whispered in French corridors. Philip II, the most Catholic king in Christendom, who inherited an empire where the sun never sets, but whose own soul exists in perpetual darkness. A man who prays for hours daily while orchestrating the systematic torture of heretics. A king who loves God with such intensity that he has forgotten how to love anything merely human. The ceremonial exchange at the border unfolds with the precision of a military operation. French nobles deliver their princess to Spanish custody like a particularly valuable piece of cargo, complete with inventories of her dowry goods and detailed instructions for her care and feeding. Isabel watches this transaction with growing numbness, understanding that she has just been officially reclassified from person to possession. The Duke of Alba receives her with cold courtesy, his eyes assessing her worth with the clinical detachment of someone purchasing livestock for breeding purposes. His Majesty eagerly awaits your arrival, Your Majesty, he intones, the formal address sounding like a cage being locked from the outside. And I am eager to serve as his faithful wife, Isabel responds in careful Spanish, her accent still carrying traces of French softness that will soon be systematically eradicated. The Duke's smile never reaches his eyes, those pale orbs that have watched countless executions and found them spiritually satisfying. The journey into Spain transforms from ordeal into apocalypse. The Spanish court travels with military precision, every protocol designed to break down Isabel's French identity and rebuild her as a Spanish cipher. They change her clothes, French silk replaced by Spanish black velvet that feels like wearing mourning for herself. They alter her meals, wine replaced by water, delicate pastries replaced by coarse bread that tastes of conquest and submission. Most insidiously, they begin changing her language. Spanish tutors ride alongside her carriage, drilling her in proper pronunciation until her French accent becomes a shameful secret she must hide. Your Majesty must speak as befits a queen of Spain, they insist, not understanding, or perhaps understanding perfectly, that forcing her to abandon her native tongue is like forcing her to forget her own name. You can see the psychological warfare in every detail. They wake her at dawn for Spanish prayers in Latin she struggles to pronounce correctly. They dress her hair in Spanish fashion, severe braids that pull at her scalp like penitential exercises. They surround her with Spanish ladies whose smiles carry the warmth of tax assessments and whose conversations focus obsessively on religious observance and royal protocol. In Spain, queens, do not laugh loudly, instructs Doña Juana de Austria, Philip's sister, who has joined the procession to oversee Isabel's transformation. His Majesty finds excessive emotion unseemly in royal women. Isabel practices smiling without joy, speaking without passion, existing without visible evidence of an inner life that might inconvenience her husband's political requirements. She is learning to become a beautiful automaton, programmed to produce heirs and religious observance in equal measure. The Spanish landscape reflects the emotional terrain of her future marriage. Vast, austere, magnificent in its desolation. Castilian plains stretch to horizons that promise nothing but more emptiness, broken only by fortress-like monasteries that rise from the earth like stone prayers to a god who answers only in suffering. This is a country that has expelled its Jews, conquered half the world, and transformed religious devotion into a form of magnificent obsession that leaves no room for merely human tenderness. As they approach Toledo, Isabel catches her first glimpse of Spanish architecture, those austere facades that hide elaborate courtyards like the emotional landscape of the man she's about to marry. Everything in this country speaks of hidden depths and surface control, of passion disciplined into rigid geometries that serve empire rather than individual desire. The letters that reach her during the journey carry news that chills her blood like winter wind through cathedral stones. Philip II has been informed of her progress and expresses satisfaction with reports of her improving Spanish pronunciation and increasing religious devotion. He writes to her directly, formal missives that read like administrative documents addressing a colonial territory rather than love letters to a bride. "We trust that your Majesty's journey proceeds with appropriate dignity and that your preparation for royal duties advances satisfactorily," he writes in Spanish so formally correct it feels carved in marble. "We await your arrival with Christian patience and conjugal expectation." Christian patience, conjugal expectation. Isabel reads these phrases like a death sentence written in diplomatic language, understanding that her husband views their upcoming marriage as a religious duty to be endured rather than a human connection to be celebrated. She will be wife to a man who approaches even love as a form of prayer, structured, disciplined, and ultimately impersonal. The nights in Spanish inns provide no refuge. Even in sleep, she dreams in Spanish now, her unconscious mind already surrendering to the linguistic colonization that will transform her from Isabel de Valois into Isabel de la Paz. She wakes speaking words she doesn't remember learning, prayers to saints whose names feel foreign on her tongue. Her French ladies whisper among themselves about the change in their mistress, how her laughter has grown forced, how her eyes have developed a hunted quality that makes them avoid direct gazes. They don't understand that they're witnessing a systematic murder, the killing of a French girl to make room for a Spanish queen. "I barely recognize myself in the mirror," Isabel confides to Madame de Clermont during one dark night when honesty feels like the only rebellion available to her. "It's as if someone else is wearing my face, speaking with my voice, living in my body while I watch from somewhere far away." "Perhaps that is what queenship means, Your Majesty," her lady responds with gentle sadness. "Learning to live as someone other than yourself." As they near Madrid, Isabel receives final instructions from the Duke of Alba about her presentation to Philip II. She must approach him with downcast eyes. Spanish queens do not meet their husbands' gazes directly until given permission. She must speak only when addressed, and then only in responses that demonstrate appropriate submission to royal, masculine authority. She must comport herself as a vessel for divine will rather than a person with individual desires. The irony burns like acid. Isabel is being prepared to meet the man who legally owns her body and soul. Yet she's forbidden to look into his eyes or speak from her heart. She will marry a stranger while pretending to be a stranger to herself, in a ceremony that will legally confirm what the journey has already accomplished, the complete erasure of everything she once was. The gates of Madrid rise before them like the entrance to purgatory, those massive stone barriers that separate the living world from the Spanish court's peculiar form of organized suffering. Beyond them waits Philip II, the most powerful man in Europe, who has never in his life been denied anything he wanted except, perhaps, the ability to want anything that wasn't politically useful. Isabel adjusts her Spanish crown, heavier than any jewelry she's ever worn, designed to remind her constantly of its weight. She practices her Spanish smile, her Spanish posture, her Spanish way of breathing that never quite fills her lungs completely. She is ready to meet her husband. She is ready to complete her transformation from French princess to Spanish queen. She is ready for everything except the moment when she looks into Philip's eyes and realizes that her journey into the labyrinth has only just begun. You enter the Alcazar of Madrid through corridors that breathe surveillance like incense, where every footstep echoes with the weight of invisible watchers and unspoken judgments. This is January 1560, and Isabel de Valois, Now legally Isabel de la Paz, though her heart still beats in French, takes her first steps into a palace designed by men who understood that the most effective control operates through architecture itself. Every stone has been placed to remind its inhabitants that privacy is a privilege reserved for God alone. Watch her move through the Hall of Mirrors, where reflective surfaces multiply her image infinitely. A teenage queen fractured into countless versions of herself, each one a different performance for different audiences. The mirrors show her what the Spanish court sees: a foreign girl wearing Spanish black, her French features carefully arranged into expressions of appropriate piety and submission. But you can see what the mirrors cannot capture: the gradual starvation of her soul, fed daily on protocol, and deprived of every nutrient that once made her human. The morning routine in the Alcazar unfolds with the precision of religious ceremony and the intimacy of surgical procedures. Isabel wakes at dawn to bells that clang like chains against her dreams, summoned not by desire, but by dynastic duty. Her Spanish ladies dress her in layers of symbolism: the black silk that announces her status as Philip's property, the crucifixes that proclaim her orthodoxy, the pearls that represent the tears she's forbidden to shed publicly. "Buenos dias, Su Majestad," they murmur in unison, their voices carrying the warmth of winter stone. These women, hand-picked by Philip's advisors for their loyalty to Spanish interests rather than affection for their young queen, serve as both companions and guards, monitoring Isabel's words, expressions, even the rhythm of her breathing for signs of dangerous French sentiment. You must understand the exquisite psychology of Spanish court life. Everything appears magnificent while functioning as a form of elegant imprisonment. The palace's golden chambers hide listening devices built into the very walls. The elaborate ceremonies that fill each day serve as performance evaluations, where Isabel's every gesture is graded for political acceptability. Even her prayers are monitored. Spanish confessors report her spiritual condition directly to Philip's ministers, transforming communion with God into intelligence gathering for the state. The breakfast ritual reveals the systematic nature of her isolation. Isabel sits alone at a table set for 50, surrounded by Spanish nobles who watch her eat as if her appetite itself might reveal treasonous tendencies. Conversation follows strict protocols. She may speak of religious matters, dynastic obligations, or approved cultural topics. Any mention of France triggers subtle but immediate corrections from her attendants, who have been trained to redirect her thoughts toward properly Spanish concerns. "Your Majesty's accent shows delightful improvement," observes the Marquesa de las Navas, Isabel's chief Spanish lady, as she corrects the Queen's pronunciation for the third time during a single meal. "His Majesty will be pleased to hear of your dedication to proper speech." His Majesty. Every conversation in the Alcazar eventually circles back to Philip II like planets orbiting a cold sun. Even when he's absent, traveling to his various kingdoms or locked in his private chambers conducting the empire's brutal business, his presence dominates the palace through the elaborate system of surveillance and control he's created. Isabel learns to modify her behavior not based on who's actually watching, but on who might be watching, which means she must perform Spanish queenship every moment of every day. The afternoons bring lessons disguised as leisure activities. Isabel practices Spanish needlework under the supervision of nuns who examine her stitches for moral implications. Sloppy embroidery suggests spiritual laxity, while overly elaborate patterns might indicate dangerous pride. Her reading material undergoes careful censorship. French poetry disappears from her library, replaced beatsats, Spanish religious texts that transform even entertainment into exercises in orthodox devotion. "A queen's mind must be furnished with thoughts appropriate to her station," explains Father Chacon, Philip's personal confessor, who has assumed responsibility for Isabel's intellectual development. French literature encourages emotional excess that ill befits a Spanish royal consort. You can see the cultural genocide in these small daily murders of her identity. Isabel's French books burned in courtyard fires that smell of childhood memories turning to ash. Her French songs replaced by Spanish hymns that turn her voice into an instrument of religious compliance. Her French way of moving through space, that fluid grace that once made courtiers compare her to music made visible, restructured into the rigid postures required of Spanish majesty. The evenings bring the most sophisticated torture, forced intimacy with a husband who approaches marriage as a form of devotional exercise. Philip II enters her chambers with the punctuality of a monastery bell, his conjugal visits scheduled between afternoon prayers and evening correspondence with colonial administrators. He speaks to her in Latin when discussing spiritual matters, Spanish when addressing practical concerns, and maintains complete silence during their most intimate moments, as if physical union were a religious ritual too sacred for human commentary. "You are adjusting well to Spanish customs," he observes during one of their stilted conversations, his pale eyes studying her face for evidence of successful cultural conversion. "The Duke of Alba reports favorable progress in your religious instruction." Isabel nods with practiced compliance, having learned that Philip prefers responses that sound like administrative confirmations rather than human communication. She has discovered that her husband governs his own emotions with the same systematic efficiency he applies to colonial rebellions, suppressing any sign of spontaneous feeling that might interfere with imperial obligations. The nights reveal the palace's true nature as a machine designed to process human souls into political commodities. Lying beside Philip's sleeping form, he maintains separate chambers but visits hers according to a schedule designed to maximize dynastic productivity. Isabel listens to the Alcazar's whispers. Guards changing shifts speak in low voices about courtiers who've fallen from favor. Servants discuss the latest auto-da-fe with the casual efficiency of people accustomed to institutionalized horror. Even the walls seem to murmur secrets about the brutal machinery that keeps the Spanish Empire functioning through methodical application of fear and faith. You must see the psychological architecture of her isolation. Isabel exists simultaneously at the center of Spanish power and completely outside of Spanish society. As queen, she commands ceremonial respect from thousands of subjects who would never dream of treating her as a human being deserving of genuine affection or understanding. She wields theoretical authority over vast territories while possessing no actual control over her own daily schedule. She lives surrounded by people whose livelihood depends on monitoring her for signs of insufficiently Spanish sentiment. The Spanish ladies who serve her speak in voices calibrated to convey information without suggesting intimacy. They dress her body, arrange her hair, and manage her appearance while maintaining emotional distances that transform basic human care into political theater. Isabel learns to accept their services while understanding that she can never trust their loyalty. These women serve Spain first, Philip second, and her only insofar as her welfare serves Spanish interests. "Does your Majesty require anything for your comfort?" they ask each night, their tone suggesting that comfort itself might be a form of self-indulgence inappropriate for royal duty. The correspondence that reaches Isabel carries messages so thoroughly censored they read like administrative reports rather than personal communications. Letters from her French family arrive months late and heavily edited, with entire paragraphs blacked out by Spanish censors who remove any content that might encourage emotional connection to her former life. She writes responses that sound like diplomatic communiques because spontaneous affection has been classified as potentially treasonous sentiment. Her private moments, those few minutes between official obligations when she might theoretically exist as herself rather than as Spanish Majesty, fill with a silence so complete it sounds like screaming. Isabel develops the habit of talking to herself in French when alone, whispering childhood memories like prayers to saints who've stopped listening. But even these solitary conversations carry risks. Spanish servants have been trained to report any evidence of their queen's nostalgic attachment to foreign customs. The seasonal celebrations reveal the Alcazar's genius for transforming even joy into exercises in political compliance. Christmas arrives wrapped in Spanish orthodoxy, so rigid it makes religious devotion feel like military drill. Easter becomes an opportunity for Isabel to demonstrate her spiritual conversion through public displays of penitential fervor that leave her knees bloody from excessive genuflection. Her own birthday passes unmentioned because celebrating individual existence might encourage the dangerous notion that queens possess personal identities separate from their dynastic functions. In Spain, we mark the feast days of saints rather than dwelling on temporal matters, Philip explains when Isabel mentions missing French birthday traditions. Royal persons serve as vessels for divine will, not as individuals deserving of personal celebration. Watch Isabel's face during these conversations with her husband. Do you see how she's learned to arrange her features into expressions of grateful understanding, while her eyes die a little more each day? She has mastered the art of looking appropriately edified by wisdom that feels like philosophical violence, of nodding agreement with principles designed to erase everything that once made her recognizably human. The palace physicians monitor her body for signs of successful pregnancy, with the same clinical attention Spanish architects apply to structural engineering projects. Her monthly cycles become matters of state importance, discussed by ministers who calculate the political implications of royal fertility as if her womb were a territorial holding requiring proper administrative oversight. Yet somehow, impossibly, fragments of her French self survive in the spaces between Spanish surveillance. Isabel develops elaborate internal systems for preserving memories that official policy requires her to forget. She practices French pronunciation silently while moving her lips in Spanish prayers. She remembers her father's laughter during moments when Spanish protocol demands expression of religious awe. She keeps alive the parts of herself that Spain cannot reach by hiding them so deeply that even she sometimes forgets they exist. But isolation has a price that compounds daily, like interest on unpayable debt. Isabel finds herself forgetting French words, losing access to concepts that exist only in her abandoned language. She catches herself thinking in Spanish even during private moments, her consciousness gradually colonized by the systematic linguistic imperialism that transforms foreign queens into domestic assets. The whispers never stop. In corridors, chambers, chapels, and gardens, everywhere Isabel moves, Spanish voices discuss her progress toward complete cultural conversion with the satisfaction of gardeners watching exotic plants adapt to new soil. They measure her success by her failures to remain herself, celebrating each small death of her French identity as evidence of Spanish institutional superiority. And through it all, Philip watches with those pale eyes that see everything and reveal nothing, satisfied that his teenage wife is transforming into the perfectly Spanish queen his